Um, Welcome to the Special Education and Pupil Services Leadership Academy. Again, as always, this Leadership Academy is brought to you by the partnerships of the Wisconsin Regional Special Education Network, the RSN, the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction, DPI, and the WCAS, Wisconsin Council of Administrators of Special Services. I'm Tracy Hogden. I have the privilege of being your facilitator today, and I'm the Regional Special Ed Network Director for CISA 4. We're excited to have so many of you join us. Our team strives to be inclusive and to meet the needs of you all as Wisconsin directors. It's the intent of this session to provide you timely and relevant information so you can do the important work that you do back in our Wisconsin districts. Um, as always, we have some meeting expectations. We invite you to turn your camera on if you are able. With that in mind, being mindful of what is in your space or your surroundings, we ask that you keep your microphone muted unless you're asking a question. We ask that you use the parking lot for documentation of questions and the chat to respond if a presenter asks us to respond in the chat. But otherwise, we ask that the chat be limited to need to know for everybody, so it's not a distraction to any of our facilitators. We'd like to remind you that we have a participant folder. And this participant folder is full of resources that we update each month. It's linked in your agenda, which my colleagues have put in the chat for you. In addition, if there's anything that comes up after the meeting, we will we'll answer those questions in the parking lot and we'll add it to our agenda. We also add the recording times to the agenda. So if you missed a section, you can go back and look at those timestamps to review that recording. As I mentioned, we have that parking lot. Unanswered questions can go in there, and then we'll work on getting you a response. If you include your email address, we'll email you directly. If you don't want to do that, just come back and check that parking lot periodically to look to see if that has been responded to. Each month, we encourage you to set a goal for yourself. By setting an intention for our learning, we're better able to focus our energy and attention on those pieces of information that are most applicable to your work, and also maybe what you're most likely to take away to go back in your districts and apply it right away. We have some timely topics for you. First, we're going to be joined by a team from DPI to discuss open enrollment. And then after a short break, we're going to switch gears and welcome Rick Cruz from DPI to discuss high-cost special ed aid. And finally, we'll wrap up by taking a look at another one of those pillars of high leverage practices with Rachel Todorovic, our RSN from CISA 7. We hope that you all have had an opportunity to identify a learning objective or set an intention for yourself this morning. I hope your coffee is full, and we're going to go ahead and get started as I welcome Jen, Carrie, Marge, and Kelly.
Good morning. I'm just making sure the rest of my team is here.
I think I saw most of them pop in in the waiting room. I was kind of watching that.
Okay, sounds good. All right. So good morning to all of you. Thank you for having us here today. We're excited to be here with you. I am here with my colleagues, Carrie Santa-Steven, Jen Demrow, and Marjorie San is joining us from the special education team. We are school administration consultants for the Department of Education. Jen, Carrie, and I work primarily with open enrollment, and we frequently use Marge's assistance to help us in special education items. Our agenda for this morning, we will have a brief program overview. We will discuss January space determinations, board policies, criteria, and board minutes, and some other important considerations. So just a brief open enrollment overview, who, what, when, where, and how. So open enrollment allows parents to apply for their child to attend public school in a district other than the one in which they live. Any Wisconsin resident in grades grades 4K through 12 may apply. Open enrollment is available for 4K, pre-kindergarten, early childhood, only if the child's resident district offers the same type of program and the child is eligible for the program in their resident district. We have two different application types for open enrollment. We have the regular application period, which allows for parents to apply for their child to attend school in the following school year. So the application window for the regular application period will be from February 2nd of 2026 through April 30th of 2026. That will be an online application process. There is also a PDF fill-enabled version available if a parent does not have online
Well, I have a
access.
meeting now.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's
Do you have
And then there is also an alternative application, which allows parents to apply for the current school year. And this begins July 1st. This is only a PDF fill-enabled application. There is no online application for the alternative application process. Hopefully we can get that changed soon, but not soon enough. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Carrie.
Thanks, Kelly. So in the next two sections of the presentation, I'm going to talk about open enrollment space determinations, as well as school board policy regarding those determinations. So the law requires that non-resident school boards determine regular and special education spaces separately for the upcoming school year at a January school board meeting. Special education space is determined by program or service. And programs and services really mean the same thing. It's the special education services provided by the LEA. The law is very specific to January. So that means don't make your determinations in November or December. You certainly should be talking about your space determinations and reviewing your policies prior to January, but when it comes to making those determinations, wait until a school board meeting in January. Boards must also specify which criteria will be used to determine those spaces, and it should be included in their open enrollment policy. Criteria must be applied consistently so space decisions are not considered arbitrary or unreasonable. The most common reason for the department to overturn open enrollment denials is for specific to space is for not following their own criteria. So if a school board does not intend to deny any open enrollment applications due to regular education space or special education space, it can do so, but you want to just make sure that gets documented at your January school board meeting minutes. And since regular education and special education spaces are determined separately, it is possible that a district could say, we're not going to limit for regular education space, but then they could choose to limit their special education spaces. And yes, that is allowed. So it's important to remember, even if the board has indicated that there is no special education space available, the district must still review each applicant's IEP in its entirety to determine whether it can meet all the needs of the applicant. The board should not make any assumptions about the special education or related services the applicant needs based on an identified disability. We have had instances where the district denies an application without reviewing the applicant's IEP, and that could be considered discriminatory.
Happy birthday, Cargo.
If the non-resident school board wishes to consider whether it has space available in the special education and related services required in an applicant's IEP, the board must specify this in its open enrollment policy, as well as the criteria it'll consider when making its determinations. So let's talk a little bit about open enrollment appeals. Keep in mind, the department is required to affirm a school board's decision unless it finds the decision to be arbitrary or unreasonable. This means that we'll likely uphold a district's application denial if the board's policy and criteria follow state law and are neither arbitrary or unreasonable. And if the board properly and consistently applied its policy and criteria and followed state law and its own policies when making decisions on applications. So just a few examples that we've seen when districts have been found to be arbitrary or unreasonable. Um, Examples of this include when a school board didn't follow open enrollment law, a board did not have the required policy upon which the decision was made. A board used criteria that were arbitrary or unreasonable. A board did not follow its policy, was inconsistent in following its policy, or made arbitrary or unreasonable exceptions to its policy. The board did not establish the number of special education spaces available in the district. Instead, the board limited the number of students it would accept based on the student's identified disability. So those are just a few examples. So let's talk a little bit about school board policy. Before a district can make their January space determinations, the district should really review their open enrollment policies and criteria. So let's discuss some of the key items that should be in a district's open enrollment policy and criteria. So a policy cannot specify that it cannot provide services to students with a specific disability. The board's policy criteria or board minutes cannot state the district will not take any students with IEPs, as this could be considered discriminatory. The policy can only consider the availability of space in special education and related services. And December is the time to be reviewing your board's open enrollment policy and making any changes for the upcoming regular application period if you find it necessary. And just as a reminder, any policy changes that need to be adopted, that needs to happen before the regular application period begins. So that begins this upcoming February on the 2nd. That's the kickoff of open enrollment for the 26-27 school year. So what are some things that your policy should include? It must specify that you'll consider available space when acting on applications. Even though the law allows school boards to consider space when acting on application, the board can only deny for that reason if it has adopted that reason in policy. So if you don't have it in policy, you're not going to be able to deny for space. Your policy must also establish space criteria, and this includes a description of the criteria, such as class size limits or caseloads, and then what those criteria are that'll be used to determine space availability. Policy must also state whether currently attending applicants and their siblings will be granted preference or a guarantee of their application. As a reminder, state law requires all districts to grant preference to applicants that are currently attending or that are siblings of currently attending students. And finally, if your district wants to use wait lists, that also must be covered in your policy. So DPI does not offer model policies for school districts to use, nor do we approve district policies as a matter of course. However, if you want us to look at your policy, we certainly can, and we'll give input, but just keep in mind that our input is not legal advice, and we always suggest that districts work closely with legal counsel when um, adopting new policy or making revisions. And if we do take a look at your policy, just keep in mind that that's not going to guarantee that your policy will stand up during an open enrollment appeal. If your district has a denial that is appealed, DPI will review your school board policy and criteria to ensure it was applied consistently and that it could not be considered arbitrary or unreasonable. So on the next slide, it's just an example of an acceptable open enrollment policy that describes special education denial reasons that are allowed under the law. When we take a look at a district's policy during an appeal, we're going to look to see the following. One, does the school board have a policy? Does the policy allow the board to deny an application for that reason? Is the policy in compliance with state law? Does the board have specific criteria in policy, rule, or other materials? Just some things to consider. So I'm now going to turn things over to Jen, and she's going to talk more in depth about criteria.
Thanks, Carrie. So the first item I'm going to cover is the criteria. Just to recap, if your board wishes to consider whether there's space to provide special education or related services, that criteria has to be specified. Whether that's majority, we ask that you put it in your open enrollment policy, at least the general criteria. And then we do have some school boards who, at their January board meeting, will provide what that criteria is and what it yields. And as long as that is covered in your board minutes or it's in the agenda packet that can be accessed for an appeal, we're okay with that. So whatever criteria you specify, it has to be followed exactly and consistently. That's when districts get into trouble, when they don't follow their criteria or don't have a criteria that we can observe on appeal. So there are no state or federal special education caseload or workload requirements. Local school districts are responsible for determining policies and criteria related to space or staffing capacity to provide special education services. So here are some examples of what your criteria may include. It can include class size limits or pupil-teacher ratios. We've been seeing that terminology change to faculty-staff ratios. And also you can use a caseload, workload considerations, or staffing capacity limit, which can include the amount of services the students might need, class or group size based on intensity of student needs, or the type of staff needed to address various disability-related needs, such as a special education teacher, pupil services staff, or paraprofessional. So there's no single way to calculate special education caseloads or workloads. Districts may use any method as long as IEPs are fully implemented and the services in each student's IEP are provided by appropriately licensed staff. Again, the board can use whatever they want to in order to determine the available spaces. However, they must be able to explain how they came to this number and defend it in case of appeal. A couple other items that the criteria may include would be projected student enrollment and changes to services in the student's IEP. Also, like I stated, other considerations can be used to determine space, again, as long as you have outlined that in policy. So here are 3 items that cannot be included as criteria. The first one, any limitations that are based on a student's special education disability category, limitations that are based on IDEA environmental codes, or any limitations related to transportation. So a non-resident school board cannot deny an application solely on the basis that transportation is required in the student's IEP or that transportation cost is high. Per state law, if a student with a disability has transportation required in their IEP, the non-resident district must provide such transportation. Next, we're going to talk about workload considerations, and I'm going to give that over to Marge. She's going to discuss that briefly.
Yeah, so um, so as Jen already mentioned, federal or state special ed law don't include any kind of guidance or limits on caseload numbers. There were some years and years and years ago, there were some things in our administrative code that sort of addressed this, but that's been gone for a really long time, like since 1997. So there's nothing in state or federal law that tells you in Wisconsin how a district needs to determine their caseload or workloads. And so because of that, it's really up to you all as a district to determine what your methodology or criteria is going to be to determine your space. And so, I mean, I think it's really a good practice to think about how you determine how you're going to generally use your resources, right? So how do you normally allocate your teaching staff, et cetera, and make sure that that's in your criteria, and that you follow it. Really, you've got to be consistent with it. You can't be arbitrary with that. And I know that there's more information about that. So now another thing really important to know, we at DPI do not have authority to set any kind of limits or approve district determined limits. If you've been around for a few years, you may remember there was some information on our website that was from a study group that came up with some recommendations. Those were never like official DPI policy. They were an idea, they were an option that could be considered, but that's not official DPI policy. So that's up to the district to determine that. And you have to make sure that all of the services in your IEP and all of your IEPs are provided with the specified amount and frequency according to the IEP and by licensed staff. So thinking about workload as opposed to caseload, having caseload numbers, I mean, that is allowed, but it may be more helpful to think about how much can your staff do? Some students require a different level of intensity from teachers than others, that sort of thing. And there are some consideration guidance that's provided on our website. Again, none of it's like official DPI sanctioned or anything like that, but there are some ideas and a good discussion about what that might mean. So that, I think, should be helpful to you. There are some the examples that are provided there were provided by other directors out in the field. So folks who are using this to try to do their own caseloads and their own determinations.
Great. Thank you, Marge.
You bet.
Jen, this is Kelly.
Yeah.
We have a couple of questions coming in, if that's okay.
Yep.
One, can you talk about the difference between criteria around staffing limits and limitations based on category?
I can talk about that.
Yeah, go ahead, Marge.
So it isn't, so basically category alone isn't really determinative of services, or it shouldn't be. I mean, it may work out that way sometimes, but generally when we're saying an eligibility category, a student who happens to be identified with an intellectual disability may require a very different level of service than another student with the same identification. So because of that, the determinations that you make and really the way your criteria is set up should really not be based on the category of disability, but should be based on some other criteria around the resources or space in your services that students require or students need. So that's tricky sometimes because I know in some districts we still talk about, we've got our ID program, we've got our LD program. I mean, it's really ultimately though, when an individual IEP team makes the decisions, the services are based on what that child needs, not based on a particular disability category. So I guess I don't know if that helps a lot, but I know whatever it's going to vary from district to district. I wish I had more solid information for you on that. I just don't. But yeah, it's really not about the label. It's about what that child requires, and that can only be determined by the IEP team. And when you're looking at an IEP from another district, you really need to review that IEP to see exactly what it is that student needs.
Marge, they're asking if you could give an example.
Well, okay, so
hang
yeah.
on, Marge.
Oh,
Just
sorry.
so you know, we've got a sample criteria
Okay.
that's coming up too. But if you want to go ahead, Marge, that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say a good example would be, I mean, if a student is identified under the area of autism, some students who have that category may require very little assistance in terms of, they might require some team talk classes, something like that. There are other students who have that same label who are going to require a whole lot more, like they might require one-to-one assistance, something like that. So that's sort of what I mean. I'm not sure if that's clarifying, but yeah.
Yes, that is a great example. Thank you. We do have some more questions, but let's go through the rest of the space determination criteria. I think that will be helpful, and then we can come back to the questions if that's okay.
Yep, that works. Thanks, Kelly.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So our next, we're going to just talk about, again, some things you cannot do in your criteria or in general for applications. So both state and federal law do prohibit discrimination against a student based on their physical, mental, emotional, or learning disability. And also the board may not deny open enrollment based on a student's eligibility for or need of a reasonable accommodation in a Section 504 plan. So open enrollment statute is very specific regarding the definition of a student with a disability, and it contains no reference to Section 504 plans. An application from a student with a 504 plan who has not been found eligible for special education under Chapter 115 must be treated as a student without a disability. This is an example of an acceptable open enrollment criteria that describes how special education space determinations can be calculated. You'll notice on this sample there's an actual formula, very similar to how you could determine regular education space, but instead of class size, they use caseload and multiply that with the number of staff that can handle that caseload, and that's going to equal your capacity. So it's acceptable because it describes specifically what the board will consider in determining those spaces and what the specific process is to get to that determination. As a reminder, the specific criteria that the board has approved to use for space determinations must be outlined in their policy. I'm going to move on to just briefly talk about contracted services. So if a non-resident school board contracts for services outside of the district and a student requires those services, the board may allow or may deny the application for special education services not available in the district, not a denial for no special education space. So there's a separate denial reason that if there's any services that you cannot provide or they're contracted out, you would deny the application for services not available. The applicant's IEP still has to be reviewed so you can determine what the services of the IEP and the student needs, how the non-resident district would deliver those required services, and whether or not they are available in the district. However, the school board can choose to approve applications for students that require those contracted services. If they do wish to approve them, the board is required to designate special education space for those services, and that is usually based on its contract for those services, whether that's with a CISA or a different outside entity. Finally, we're going to talk about the board minutes, and I'll provide some examples of a good example of a board meeting minutes and then a not so good board meeting minutes. So the board needs to calculate the number of spaces for each special education program or service for which a caseload or class size can be established. The board can consider the level of service it is able to provide. It's not necessary to designate special education spaces by grade, although we have seen districts that have done so and done so successfully. It's not enough to state that the board accepts the administration's recommendations, unless those recommendations are written and included as an official part of the record of the meeting. The minutes or other official record of the meeting must include the written criteria and the calculations upon which the number of spaces were determined. This is an example of an acceptable open enrollment space determination described in a board's January board minutes. I removed the specific information regarding regular education since we're solely talking about special education at this presentation. So the district's criteria was included in their open enrollment policy, and that's why it's referenced on this example and why it's not in this particular screenshot, I would say. So the reason it's acceptable is because it says right here, the board approved the number of seats in speech and language, and also due to their caseload formula, there's no other seats available. And then down below, they actually went into each of those services or program and what the spaces were determined to be. So this is an example of an unacceptable space determination in the board minutes. It's unacceptable because it specifically and directly refers to disability categories, not workloads or caseloads or class sizes. So just like Marge talked about, this is basically a list of possible disability categories that students can have, and that's how it was determined. The tricky one is speech and language, right? Because it's a disability category as well as a program. So that one you can include, but the rest of these here are specific to disability categories, and that could be considered arbitrary. We've overturned a couple districts for doing it this way. Last thing I'm going to talk about is space determinations and just touch briefly on alternative applications. So there's 3 different times that space determinations may play a role in if you can approve alternative applications. So the first time frame is going to be after the January board meeting and up until June 30th. A non-resident school board can approve an alternative application submitted for the current school year if the board did not limit the number of spaces available in the pupil's succeeding grade or special education service for applications submitted during the regular application period for the following school year. Okay, so what the heck does all of that mean? So what an example would be if the board has determined there are no spaces available in speech and language for the 26-27 school year, the non-resident district cannot approve any alternative applications for the current school year of 25-26 for any students who need speech and language services as part of their IEP. And that would occur once the January space determinations have been approved. Now, the next time frame is going to be the beginning of the next school year until 3rd Friday, and that is going to be July 1st to the 3rd Friday in September. A non-resident school board can only approve an alternative application if the special education services doesn't have any space determinations that were established back in January. So an example of that would be if the board determined they had no spaces in speech and language for 26-27, you cannot approve any alternative applications if the student requires speech and language as part of their IEP, and you have to honor that up until the 3rd Friday in September. Lastly is what we on the open enrollment team call the loophole time. So those space determinations you make in January are only good through the 3rd Friday in September. So if you receive an alternative application after the third Friday count, but before the board meets again to determine your spaces for the next school year, you can either look at your numbers now in those services, or you can continue to use the January space determinations. So that's completely up to the district's discretion. Okay, I think this is a good time if you want Kelly to ask questions because Carrie's going to come back in and talk about some important considerations. So if you've got questions, go ahead. You're on mute.
So sorry.
It's
Thank you.
okay.
Could you please give an example of how a limit could be written to manage intake of students with one-on-one adult support in their IEPs? An example would be a paraprofessionals.
Marge, what you got? You're on mute.
Yeah,
Okay, you got it.
yep. I don't know why it always takes me a second to find it. It's not that hard to find.
I know, right?
But,
It should be easier.
it should be easier. Maybe it's operator error. At any rate, the way that I understand this is that now, first of all, it's part of this goes back to really making sure that when you describe a service in an IEP, that it's super clear what it means. Different districts use a lot of different terminology to describe particularly adult support. So it might be, if it's one-to-one, this student requires a person, make that clear. There's no standardized language in the regs or anything to tell you how to do it. But if a student who clearly requires a one-to-one staff person to be with them in their IEP, and that's not something you have in the district, I think that's not available. I think that's the way that districts have looked at that over the years, and the way that we've looked at the way that the open enrollment folks have looked at the appeals that have come in. So if you don't have them, you don't have them.
Yep, it's completely optional for the district at that point, whether they want to hire one or already have one or however that works. So the law does allow you to state that you don't have the services in that case.
Okay, next question. How do you recommend handling if the family of a student with significant needs revokes consent for services in order to quote unquote get into a district who would otherwise deny due to IEP needs?
Marge, this is to you again.
These are such tough questions. They're really, really tough. And I know that this happens. I know that it puts districts in a really difficult situation. The really kind of the nuts and bolts sort of answer is, once a parent has revoked consent, that is now, you have to treat that as a student without a disability. So the same way you treat any other open enrollment applications in that for that age group, et cetera. Tricky, because of course you're also still responsible for child find and meeting that child's needs. So tell me how that works. I mean, I know that there are situations where a family has done kind of what you've said to get in. And then once the child gets there, the district feels like they have to start an evaluation because they know that this child has needs. And then that can just lead to a kind of a revolving door or a vicious cycle, or, parent perhaps not providing consent to do the assessments necessary for the evaluation. It is tricky. We know it's something that's in the law, but there's not really a way around that under current law.
Yeah, and from the open enrollment perspective on that, it depends on when the parent revokes consent. And by that, an example of that would be an application is submitted during the regular application period, so that's springtime. And when you look at that application, the student or you look at the application and you receive the student's IEP and you've reviewed it and you have determined you don't have space, so you deny that open enrollment application. And after the fact, the parent says, nope, I want to revoke. If that happens, then it is up to the district's discretion on whether or not you want to reverse your decision. Because what we say is, at time of application, what was the student's status? And if the student was special ed when you made that determination, you do have the option to stick with that denial. You can certainly overturn if you wish. The reverse of that is someone applies in the spring, revokes consent. You do not receive an IEP from the resident district. You have to treat that student as a student without a disability. So for us, it's timing when that happens. I think that can also apply to alternative applications as to when the parent applies and when they actually revoke consent. So it does get a little tricky, but that's kind of our general guidelines.
Thank you. Excuse me. Are there considerations for creating a wait list versus not creating a wait list? Things to consider or be aware of?
I don't think so. I think our guidance that we've put in place, or what we usually give to districts, is that if you do a wait list, it allows you to A, be a little bit more conservative with your decisions and space determinations because the wait list gives you that flexibility. You can go to that wait list the day after the deadline to get out approvals and denials, which is that first Friday following the first Monday in May or June. Sorry, it's in June. So it's completely up to you. You can also determine to do wait lists on specific programs, right? You don't have to do a wait list for everybody. As long as that's outlined in your board's policy, that you have an option. Usually it'll say wait list may be done, and then the board can consider annually if they want to create those wait lists. But I usually say go for it because at least that gives you the option to be flexible in the future.
Okay, thank you. We have a follow-up question regarding the paraprofessional question. If your paras are currently fully booked, is that service not available for any applicant who requires para support in a class where a para isn't already scheduled, since it would require hiring another? What if it's only 30 minutes or 60 minutes or small blocks of time?
I think you could do either one. I really think it depends on your situation. I mean, if your pairs are full, you could say we don't have space in that service that the child needs. The reverse of that is you could say we don't have an available para for this student, so then it could be services not available. So I think it could be either one depending on the situation.
Okay, and I think one last question. If a student qualifies for a disability, moves, and meets the criteria for a tuition waiver, how does that relate to special education open enrollment caps?
Yep, that's coming up. Carrie's going to talk about tuition waivers and how that kind of fits in. But what I will say is, in general, your space determinations are only for open enrollment applicants. Tuition waiver students are not part, there's no space determinations for them. If you have someone who qualifies, they are eligible, then you have to continue to provide those services. So you really can't take space determinations into account or deny a tuition waiver due to no space.
We have one last question sneak in. Would a para support fall under cross-categorical services determination?
I'm thinking no. What do you think, Marge?
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking
Ugh,
no, but I think it depends on what your methodology is to figure this out in the
sure.
first place, right?
Yep.
So if if para time or, whatever isn't something that you've considered as one of the services, I don't think you could, arbitrarily do it afterwards, at least not under the space considerations. Now,
Right.
arguably, service not available. These are
Yep.
distinctions that we talk a lot about at DPI, and I know they're really tough to think through and apply when you're actually looking at kids' IEPs and names. But I mean, I think it would really depend. Generally speaking, I would think you'd want to consider that as sort of a separate service. The teacher time and capacity is one thing, and if they have a para need, that's separate, just because that's a big need. So I don't know, but again, I think it really depends how you've done it. So for example, in the past, it looks like, Kelly, what you said was you haven't done that in the past. Your district hasn't considered paraspace in the past as its own separate thing. If you were to want to do that, you'd have to make some changes to your board policy to indicate that you're going to do that now. Got that right, Jen? Did I get that right? Yay me.
Okay, I think we're good for now. Thank you both.
Great. So for the last portion of the presentation, we're going to go over important considerations. Some of this I might go through kind of quick since we've covered some of this in the Q&A. Um, but let's start off. I know that we mentioned this earlier, but it's worth repeating. Even if your board has determined that there are no spaces available in special education, the district still needs to review each applicant's IEP in its entirety to determine whether it can meet all of the students' needs. So we like to remind districts that parents often make mistakes on their open enrollment application. So for just an example, sometimes parents will mark, yes, my student does have an IEP on the application. And we have many times seen districts then deny the application because they don't have special education space. But then later finds out, oh, the parent marked that the student had an IEP and really they had a 504 plan. So that's an example of why you really need to wait to see what records come in the record exchange during the open enrollment application process. It's possible that the student's IEP could have been dismissed. It is possible that the parent marked the application wrong. We just want to make sure that districts are doing their due diligence and following the law. And we've talked about this previously too. 504 plans are not considered special education for open enrollment purposes. And I know that we also briefly talked about preferences and guarantees. The law does require school boards to grant preference to student applicants who are currently attending and the siblings of currently attending students. As a reminder, when you grant preference to this group of students, when you're making your space determinations, you have to remove those students from your projected enrollment. So we're talking about tuition waiver, kids who are attending on a tuition waiver, or students who have told your district will be moving out over the summer. And a school board can take that preference and go one step further and offer a guarantee. So that's a guaranteed approval of an open enrollment application. And the guarantee can be for currently attending students, siblings of currently attending students, or both. We don't typically see both, but it's possible. So if a board guarantees approval of currently attending applicants and or siblings of currently attending students, it must guarantee all currently attending applicants and or siblings of currently attending students. The key there is all. That means we're including students with disabilities. It's a common misconception that districts think students with disabilities are not included in a space guarantee. That's false. And when we talk about guarantees, it's specific to space. Districts can deny for other reasons as outlined in law. There's a couple other reasons you can deny an application other than space, such as habitual truancy, expulsion. So we just want to make sure districts know that if you're going to do a guarantee, that includes those two categories, but it also includes students with disabilities. Now, if your policy has a statement, we call it a may statement, where it says we may guarantee the approval of currently attending applicants or siblings of currently attending students, then your district needs to make sure at the January school board meeting that you decide and document that in your minutes whether you're going to honor the preference or a guarantee. If you don't, then you're not going to be able to offer a guarantee. It just defaults to preference. Another important consideration, and this comes up quite a bit, the termination of open enrolled students due to no special education space or services not available after a continued open enrolled student has an IEP developed or revised. Just as a reminder, when districts set their open enrollment space determinations in January, those determinations are for new applicants. And they're only valid through the third Friday in September. A continued open enrolled student who has an IEP developed or revised, this situation is independent of your space determinations. So that's often a misconception that districts think that if an IEP is developed or revised for a student that's already open enrolled, that they are bound by those space determinations, and that is not true. What the law says, if an IEP is developed or revised for a student already open enrolled, the district may consider whether space is available. So you can consider it, but you're not required to do so. So just keep that in mind, because um, a lot of districts feel that they have no choice but to terminate the open enrollment. A district can continue to serve the student regardless of what your space determinations are. Also, as a reminder, a student's open enrollment cannot be terminated due to staffing or resource issues. It can only be terminated if the IEP is developed or revised. It recently was brought to our attention that some districts are trying to terminate open enrollment due to an evaluation determining that the student qualifies for special education, or non-resident districts refusing to honor a referral or to conduct an evaluation because the district has no special education space. We can't do that either. State law specifically states that open enrollment termination must be based on an IEP development or revision under special education statutes. You cannot terminate the open enrollment because the student qualifies for special education or because a referral has been made and you believe the student will qualify. If a non-resident district chooses to terminate a student's open enrollment after the development or revision of an IEP, and the district determines that there is no space available, we strongly suggest districts use the DPI templates for termination that are available on our website. Those templates include required information that districts must provide to the parent, and then they also are written to omit information that really shouldn't be mentioned in a termination letter. Okay, and so the last few slides here talk about tuition waivers versus alternative applications, and I'll try to wrap this up quickly. Um, when when we talk about tuition waivers, we are specifically talking about resident students who have moved out of your district, but they want to stay attending your district. Okay, tuition waivers aren't for open enrolled students. We do have a tuition waiver matrix on our website, and that will help districts figure out what form you should use. But in general, the rule is if a resident student moves out of your district prior to the third Friday in September, you should have the parent do an alternative open enrollment application. That's always preferred because if a student's application is approved, for the most part, they can stay in your district through the course of their school career. With tuition waivers, those only get you one additional year in the district, and then you're going to have to apply for open enrollment. So prior to third Friday, use an alternative open enrollment application if it would be approved. If that application would be denied. For example, if the student has an IEP and you do not have special education space available, and the alternative application would be denied, then you can check to see if the student would qualify for a tuition waiver. Um, and when you talk about qualifying for a tuition waiver, that's really just based on the date of move, the date that the family moved out of the district. Um, keep in mind, districts cannot deny a tuition waiver because of open enrollment space determinations, a student's disability status, or habitual truancy. It's solely based on the date of move. I think we need to, the last thing is current year tuition waivers. So the example I just gave were moves that happen before Third Friday. Moves that happen after Third Friday, those are, you don't do an open enrollment application. Those are current year tuition waivers. Students on a current year tuition waiver are treated this just the same as resident students. You would have the parent fill out the current year tuition waiver. Really, all that is just for record keeping. It gives you the student's new address. And then the district will need to follow up with this parent before the regular open enrollment application period begins in February to make sure that they apply for open enrollment if they want to stick with the district for that following school year. I think the one thing I didn't touch on is current year tuition waiver students are counted as residents. They're counted in your head count. Additional year waivers, those are treated just like open enrollment for funding purposes. So additional year waivers have to be submitted back to DPI. Those are not included in OPAL, which is where our open enrollment database. We manually calculate the aid for additional year tuition waivers, so we need to get a copy of those. I think I've covered everything on tuition waivers now. The last two slides are just resources on the DPI website about open enrollment, and then our contact information. Please feel free to reach out anytime. We're happy to help, happy to walk through everything, whether it's special education related, or about any of the other topics that open enrollment sort of intersects with. We're happy to help districts. Thank you so much for having us today.
Thank you all. It was certainly a timely topic and something that was on the hearts and minds of the folks in the room as we had quite a few questions come through in the chat and in the parking lot. We're running just a little bit behind, but I talked to Rick Cruz on the side and he was 100% okay with still allowing for a little break. So why don't we take a break here and we will return at 11:10. We'll put it up on the slideshow, but we will come back at 11:10 to talk about high cost aid. Welcome back. We have, stop my share here. Welcome back. We have Rick Cruz joining us today to round out our session here with some information about high cost special ed aid. So thank you, Rick, for joining us and being flexible with the time.
Thank you. I just had to make sure I got my microphone off. I was so pleased this morning to see the names and faces of so many of you who I've been able to work with in the past few years. And I'm really looking forward to, again, working on this fiscal reporting with you. I know it's not glamorous, but I hope we can make it fun in some ways. So I'm looking forward to this year again. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, Rick, and I do see that you're sharing your slides, but it's like in your presenter mode. So I don't know if that's what you intended for us to do.
Which screen am I at? Is it on this screen, right? Do you see my cursor moving or no?
No.
All right, so
now I do.
All right, let's try this again. A little technical difficulty, it can happen.
It can. Happens to all of us.
This one. All right. Correct mode?
I believe so.
Okay, excellent.
Thank you.
Then I will begin. Thank you very much. So good morning again. And what I'd like to do today is give you a brief presentation on state categorical high-cost special education aid. I want to present a roadmap and resources that you can use to complete the application process and receive that categorical aid reimbursement for eligible expenditures. Just like the Fund 27 special education aid, high-cost reimbursement comes from some certain appropriation determined by the legislature and approved by the governor. The reimbursement rate is determined wholly by the number of LEAs applying. So it's going to be all the school districts, the CISAs and CDEBs, and the amount of the verifiable aid eligible expenses that they submit. The application this year will open on this coming Monday, December 15th, and it will close on March 2nd of 2026. As always, I've included my bookings link at the end of the presentation. So if you would like to schedule time with me virtually regarding any of the concepts or the actual fiscal reporting, please feel free to go ahead and do so. I'm always happy to help you. And I was just notified that I will again this year be at the Federal Funding Conference at the end of February. So if you get the opportunity to join us for the Federal Funding Conference, I will be working at the DPI help desk on both days if you need some in-person one-to-one help. All right, let's see. Okay, so the high-cost application is located in WSFIP. To log in, you must have that WAMS ID and the WAMS account. If you don't have it, you should contact your application security manager, administrator, provide the WAMS ID, and they'll be able to enroll you in that module. I'm including links on the bottom right of each of these slides that are guidance related and also support documents to help you with any issues that might come up. So on this slide, you can see the general high-cost special education aid guide, as well as school level reporting access and common issues of technical assistance that you may need. The link to the DPI website for both high-cost education and that SLR technical assistance I mentioned is provided. Any questions so far about accessing? Okay. Excellent. Moving right along, the application process begins with the identification of your high-cost special education students. And I was happy that in the first hour, Jen and the team brought up different scenarios with IEPs, because that's critical in preparing the data for your reporting into the high-cost special education application. Costs like tuition or placement into another school district or a private school, while that itself is not aid eligible as an expenditure, it does count toward meeting the threshold of $30,000. That's the minimum threshold that the eligible expenses have to meet for each high-cost special education student. So the placement and then other costs that aren't aid eligible, like one-to-one paraprofessional, that was one of the last things we spoke about in the last hour, specialized transportation arrangements, or even specialized equipment. When I talk about specialized equipment, I'm talking about things like a changing table or a Hoyer lift, even things like those super expensive Braille translator devices that schools use, and CISAs indeed sometimes facilitate the rental of that equipment out to the different school districts. So that's something to note. And then vehicles. There's a whole description of eligible vehicle expenses and depreciation that I'll talk about in the coming slides. Again, these are all listed in the high-cost special education program guidance, those links in the bottom right corner. If you ever have a question about an eligible expense or the process of depreciation, again, feel free to reach out to me. I'm always available. And as I mentioned previously, the process always begins with the IEP. It's important to remind the IEP team that you do work with that units of service should be accurate and concise when developing their plan. High cost aid is determined using a calculation of student aid eligible costs, like the ones I just mentioned, along with a unit of time to determine a reimbursement amount. So units of service that are considered usable for the high cost special education application purposes are going to be recorded in minutes, periods, days, or caseload. I have had instances where financial manager or assistant will come up to me and let me know that the IEP just said 3 instances of speech and language pathology per year. And that doesn't really tell me a unit of service. It's kind of vague and ambiguous. So we do look for specifics when it comes to that unit of service in the guidance, especially question number 9 in the frequently asked questions document. There's a breakdown of these units of service and the qualifications of parameters used to meet those, and some really good examples to explain that. Does anyone have any questions about the units of service as long as we're at this point? No? Oh, you guys are great.
Rick, this is Erin. They are asking though, hi, they're asking for the slideshow. So would you be able to share that with me at the end of today's presentation?
You bet. And I will also be
Great.
posting this on the VPI high cost website.
Great.
One thing I will mention is I do have a series of 6 mini guided PowerPoint presentations. Each one is less than 6 minutes and covers the major concepts of the high cost special education process. So there's one specifically on equipment. It's probably about 5 or 6 minutes long, touches on the most important points, and it also has those links to guidance that I think people find helpful. All right. Let's see. Oh, okay. So the WISE ID. The WISE ID provides a reference guidance point for the application to provide student data. What happens is when you enter the WISE ID data into the application, it automatically pulls in demographic information. So it will have the student name, the date of birth, any indicators like special education, yes or no, or and days of attendance. Those will all be checked on the back-end databases that you share through your student information system and push out to WISE ID. So it's important that you have that information up to date prior to entering your data, because that's going to be used in the calculation. If you don't have access to WISE ID, or if the school district that you work with doesn't have access, there is a guidance document located, the hyperlink at the bottom of this slide, that will help you troubleshoot some of those common occurrences and get you in touch with the people who you need to. So the most typical issues that arise are if that indicator is not checked, or if the FAPE is misreported. Does everyone know what the FAPE is? The resident or non-resident district will report that they are responsible for the free and appropriate public education for the student. If 2 agencies are reporting the FAPE responsible, it'll cause a conflict in the application, and it won't allow the application to proceed until that is resolved by contacting the other agency, updating both the information systems, and pushing the data to WISE ID again. Does that make sense? All right, excellent. Let's move on to specific elements of the application. Did you guys lose me?
Nope, we hear you, Rick, and we see your screen.
All right, excellent. So the application process begins with the identification of the high-cost special education students. Again, that's going to be a minimum threshold of $30,000 of eligible expenses. One thing I'd like to mention about this, and I talked about this just a second ago about the tuition or advanced placement. Again, that is not itself aid eligible, but it does count toward meeting a threshold of $30,000. So you can include that as an 019 project expenditure, and that'll help you reach that threshold if any other expenses don't meet that requirement. So you can record that first $30,000 as categorical aid and the rest as IDEA, or any combination that you see fit to make sure that you reach that threshold so that we can get aid to the student, if it is a better proposition than just using IDEA. Let's see. Should we ask questions? Identifying the cost. So again, very general terms, there's 3 cost identification methods. And again, these are all non-administrative costs that are eligible for special education high cost aid. Only a cost that is clearly connected to one specific child would be considered a child-specific cost. For example, a program aide, that paraprofessional who assists in the classroom and circulates between multiple students, is a program cost, not a child-specific cost. The provider is interacting with several students, so it's not considered child-specific. However, if that program aide is assigned as a one-to-one aide to assist only a single student, then the cost is child-specific. There's different ways to record this in the high-cost application as either a student-only cost or a program cost. There is a document that I've included as a link on the final resources page that will walk you step-by-step through the process with really nice screenshots of entering that data into the application. And of course, if you've gone through the online guided PowerPoints that I've made and that guidance that I just spoke about, and you still need help, again, please feel free to schedule a bookings with me, and we can walk through some examples before you get to the bulk of the students that you're entering. Or if it's just one student, we can just walk through it together. A program is a set of special education and related services for children identified with the same disability-related needs, such as a cross-categorical program. I always like to talk about Kettle Moraine because their reporting every year is just exemplary. They have all their programs listed. Each program will have all their cross-categorical or all their paraprofessionals, their specified services. It's just very neat and concise. So they're someone to use as a resource for me. And if I do an online review of the process with you, I will certainly bring up their application to review the details of their data entry. But that's a definition of a program. The cost of salary and fringe benefits, purchase services and supplies for the provision of specified services, which are nursing, social work, psychology, guidance counseling, speech language pathology, and audiology. 4 of those, at least, are part of what we used to refer to as Act 221, and now we call them pupil services eligibility personnel. Those would also be entered as a program, a transition program, or a shared specialized transportation route, for example, to and from an off-site service. And again, that paraprofessional that may provide one-to-one aid to a single student on that specialized transportation route is aid eligible, and you should record that. One thing to keep in mind that I'll just mention on the side here is, just like regular state categorical special education aid, or Fund 27 as we call it, the DPI licensure applies to the providers that are on the application. So I will go through, I'll start reviewing the data on day 1, all through the reporting period, to make sure, number 1, that the cost is eligible, and number 2, that the provider is licensed. If you ever have any questions about that process or need help with licensing, I can certainly put you in touch with the licensing team or guide you to the electronic licensing online lookup. Any questions about cost identification? Okay, let's go on to equipment. Equipment can be child specific or program. So those two cost identification centers, one can be equipment that's child specific, or it could be equipment that's for a program. Equipment for a program, the easiest example is going to be high cost specialized transportation, a vehicle, for example. The equipment must have been purchased by the applying agency within the last 5 years of the fiscal year being claimed and used exclusively for special education and related services during that time. So once again, a reminder that we're only seeking data for high-cost students, those students with aid eligible costs in excess of $30,000 per year. The equipment value then will decrease 20% of the original acquisition and setup cost during the school year in which it was purchased and any of the 4 subsequent school years, whether the item was purchased with cash or with proceeds of a capital lease, and provided that the item has been used exclusively for the provision of special education and related services since its acquisition. So what does that mean in the simplest terms possible? Basically, the purchase of a vehicle, let's say you bought it 3 years ago, you're in year 3 of owning that vehicle, you can still claim it for year 3, 4, and 5 at 20%. Ideally, the year of purchase would be the year that you claim that on the high cost application so that you would realize 20% for the full 5 years of the depreciation cost. Does that make sense? Okay, great, excellent. And there is specific equipment guidance located in that primary high cost special education program guidance. The last tab of the application itself is going to be the Finalize tab. This is a great way to check on your progress of the cost that you're entering for each student. You can access at any time. You're not going to lose data by going to the Finalize tab. You can go back and change data. The table will update automatically. The nice thing about this is there is the ability to download the summary page into an Excel spreadsheet so that you can review in a grid instead of this kind of bulky web page. And then you can, of course, play around with the numbers and see if in fact, verifying whether it was aid eligible or grant funded, and what the special services were. One thing I don't remember if I mentioned was you also will need the total amount of a student that you enter of their costs that were Medicaid school-based services, as well as open enrollment. Those are considered revenue, and when you report them, they have to be deducted from the aid eligible total so that you aren't double aided on a single expense. Once you are done reviewing and updating, at the bottom of this page, you'll proceed to the next to get a really nice summary document that tells you exactly what was reported in WISE Data Finance compared to what you have just entered into the high cost special education application. It will do a sum check and let you know if any of the totals are in excess of what was reported in WISE Data Finance. That means you may have accidentally transposed some numbers, but this allows you to go back and fix it before you submit. And in fact, it won't let you proceed to certify until you fix any of those types of errors. And again, I'm willing to help you identify and review the costs in both WISE Data Finance and in WISFIP to make sure that your reporting is as accurate as possible. Let's see. The final slide on here, boy, I really whizzed through this, didn't I? The final slide is going to contain my contact information, my phone number, as well as my bookings link and all of the informational links to the guidance. I'm also going to put a plug in for the federal funding conference. The link to register and see the conference details is located in that bottom link. And you should feel free to reach out to me prior to then, or just plan on meeting me there, and I will walk through any last minute questions or revisions that you have. The update again is going to be the week following the federal funding conference. So this isn't to say wait until that week, meet with me, and then complete your reporting, because you'll probably run out of time. So let me know as we go along, starting next week, if you need help or have any questions, and I am happy to help you. And thank you for joining me this morning. Does anyone have any questions that I can answer right now?
Rick, I see one question in the chat.
Okay.
And I'm not sure, I'm trying to think back if you mentioned this in your description, but the question is, would curriculum count under program cost?
What type of curriculum? Are you talking about professional development or?
Both.
I'm not
So
sure.
Yeah, I can jump in. So we added a self-contained program for students who are taking the DLM. And so we need to get training for our teacher. And also we don't have currently any curriculum for students who are participating in the DLM.
Okay. So we recently did a revision of WOOFR. I don't know if you're aware of that. And the costs associated with professional development or instructor trainings has changed a little bit based on funding source and the type of training and who you're paying it to. So I am going to drop this link into the chat. This is the most recent Fund 27 matrix. So if you get a chance, just click on it and bookmark it.
Thank you so much, Rick, for joining us. I'm not seeing anything else in the chat or the parking lot right now. But when you have those slides, we'll link them in our agenda, and then we'll have all those hyperlinks that you shared as well. So that will be wonderful.
You bet. I will send that over to you. And again, feel free to reach out to me with questions. I'm always here to help you.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate your time and walking us through the application, knowing that it opens next week and closes on, I think, the 23rd of February, I saw.
It closes on 2nd of March, and the
2nd
federal
of
funding
March.
conference is the 23rd and 24th.
Okay, on the website, it might still say February 23rd. So
I will update that.
wonderful. I'm glad to hear it's March. Yes, another week.
A little bit more time.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
As we wrap up our morning together, we have Rachel Kotarabic, who is going to talk with us about the next high leverage practice pillar. Thanks for being here, Rachel.
Good morning, everyone. I am just trying to make sure that I can hopefully share my screen. All right. All right, Tracy, are you seeing my screen? Because I lost all of you when I started.
Yep, I sure am, Rachel. Thank you.
Perfect. All right, so today we are going to continue our journey of exploring the HLPs, or the high leverage practices, and we are going to specifically focus on collaboration. And as a team, we have chosen HLP 1 because it is one of the most essential practices to master, because it is used every single day, regardless of grade level, content area, or disability status of students. So as you can see, there are 3 high leverage practices embedded under the pillar of collaboration. Effective special education teachers collaborate and communicate with a wide range of professionals, families, and caregivers to ensure that educational programs and related services are effective and meeting the needs of each student with a disability. So you can see that represented here with HLP 1, 2, and 3. So what we want to share with you also is there are leadership guides. And so When we think about collaborating with professionals to increase student success, HLP1 is that great starting point as a leadership team to assess current teams and systems within your schools. With it, the guides provide guidance specific to what the HLP looks like and how school leaders can have conversations with teachers. You can determine entry points for your support, and you can build stronger relationships between general and special education partners. So collaboration with general education teachers, paraprofessionals, and support staff is necessary to support students' learning and facilitate students' social and emotional well-being across all school environments and instructional settings. Collaborations with individuals or teams, as we know, does require interpersonal skills such as sharing ideas, active listening, questioning, planning, problem solving, and negotiating, just to name a few. Through collaboration, effective special education teachers develop and adjust instructional and/or behavioral plans based on student data. They also coordinate expectations, responsibility, and resources to maximize student learning. The Cedar Center guides, which are also linked on this slide, were recently updated and intended for administrators, leaders, and coaches, as well as mentors to support teams. So linked on these slides in blue are the HLP guides, and in red are the Cedar Center guides. So the one that's popped open here are the HLP, and the Cedar Center guides are similar, but we'd like to just point out here that the Cedar Center ones have the tips for school leaders to support teachers. There are also questions here to prompt discussion, for self-reflection, and then for observer feedback. So incredibly useful resource for each of the HLPs. We would also point out that one thing we noticed when developing and selecting this particular HLP for today was when we are doing the problem of practice with induction grant participants, a lot of the problem of practice that comes into those is around collaboration, whether it is how do I communicate with my general education teacher, or how do I communicate with my paras, or how do I participate in a team meeting? So we really felt that this was important because of those things coming forward through the induction grant thread as well. And so sharing these leadership guides too, we thought was a great resource for all of you in that. So the next piece that we have to share with you then is a short video clip that is really a great summary of HLP1. And this is maybe a 4.5-minute clip or 5-minute clip of HLP1. And it is not only for us to explain to you HLP1, but it's also a resource that you can use with your staff when teaching about the HLPs. What we've heard in the induction grant, and as we continue to push out the learning of this, is this would be good for all staff. So if you're working with your administrative team and you talk about doing this at a staff meeting, this would be a great resource to be able to use to teach about the HLPs. So hopefully I can get the video to play and share sound all at one time here.
First, we describe collaboration and prioritize related communication skills special educators should acquire. Second, we provide suggestions for implementing effective collaboration techniques within co-teaching and paraprofessional relationships. Part 1. Introduction to Collaboration. HLP1 is one of the most essential practices to master because it is used every single day regardless of grade level, content area, or disability status of students. The effective special educator who collaborates well with colleagues is in strong position to also collaborate with families, which is HLP number 3, and run effective meetings so quality programming can be decided upon and then implemented, which is HLP number 2. In addition, collaboration is essential to implementing essentially all of the assessment, social behavioral, and instruction HLPs. In sum, this is the first high leverage practice for a very good reason. It is very easy for professionals working in schools to take collaboration for granted. Obviously, teachers and other staff see and speak to one another on a regular basis, which can give the illusion that collaboration is happening. However, as noted by Friend and Barron, interaction alone does not constitute collaboration. True collaboration requires intention, effort, and skill on the part of the professionals, and it should result in positive outcomes for all parties, especially those students with disabilities and others who struggle. A key aspect of successful collaboration is mutual respect between partners and team members. Respect goes beyond simple admiration or friendly interactions. Respect implies that team members recognize and honor the contributions of their colleagues and do their best to ensure consensus is reached whenever possible based on various viewpoints. Respectful team members also use data to communicate with one another and make decisions to ensure student performance is the primary determinant for making changes. Using data in this way puts all team members on the same footing regardless of experience, and can be used when inevitable disagreements between collaborators arise. In addition to respect, communication is foundational for successful collaboration, and a great way for respect to be shown and earned between team members. There are several communication skills that special educators should develop to promote collaboration. The first is listening. Nonverbal affirmations, such as nodding, can demonstrate active listening while the speaker is sharing. Once the speaker is done sharing, paraphrasing demonstrates the listener understood what the partner was conveying. The next needed skill is nonverbal communication. Nonverbal actions can suggest attitude and emotion in any face-to-face interaction, including virtual spaces. For example, facial expressions in person or on a video conference may suggest a range of emotions on a given topic. It is important for educators to monitor their nonverbal communication to suggest collaborative emotions such as respect, flexibility, and understanding. Educators should also do their best to ask questions that are objective and open-ended. If a question is framed objectively, this can reduce subjectivity or judgment that might influence a response. To ensure responses to questions contain more than just yes or no, it is important to ask open-ended questions. For example, consider a special educator asking a general educator, "Have you done a better job at supporting John in math class since we last spoke?" This is judgmental towards the general educator and might result in a short response. A better way to ask this might be, "How has John's math work completion changed since we started intervention last week?" Similarly, statements should be accurate and descriptive to ensure clear communication. Detailed, specific statements lead to productive conversations. Finally, it's important to note cultural differences when communicating. By accounting for and respecting cultural differences and using these communication skills, special educators can communicate effectively and collaborate well with other professionals.
All right, so they do go on to share an example of what collaboration looks like. And then as you saw, there is a part 1 and a part 2 to the video. So certainly you can dive into the video and there are more pieces to this, but we don't want to spend our entire time learning about that. So the next resource that we have for you then is a self-assessment. And this isn't necessarily something that you have to do yourself. This is certainly a tool that teams can engage in. And we would suggest that you maybe start as a leadership team to self-assess where your building teams are to determine your entry point. So building leaders can then, maybe you could take the tool back and have staff engage in rating themselves to inform your next steps of implementing HLP1. at the building level. So, how do you build your system? How do you build staff sustainability? And how would you know? What evidence do you have of that implementation? And so, in that regard, this tool could be one source of data to build and inform your work. So I would encourage you to look this over, and I'm hoping I don't have my chat open. Tracy, did you or Brenda get a chance to pop this in the chat for me?
The videos are linked, but we'll get that linked as well. Yes.
Okay, thank you. So in the interest of time, I don't think we're gonna have you do the interactive piece of this, where I was gonna have you maybe select two areas or an area that your staff maybe needs to look at or work on right now. But I will say that this is again something that we had induction grant participants look at and self-evaluate. So again, just another tool of how are we reflecting on our practice. So then the next tool that we have for you, and these will all be shared, is a rubric for HLP1 around collaborating with professionals to increase student success. And so again, this can support teams with implementation as aligned to the self-reflection tool. It can be a personal reflection and a team conversational piece to build practices as adults work together to implement HLP1 within their building or their system. And so again, just a rubric around, are we highly effective? Are we approaching? Are we ineffective? And I really like that we have the idea of the database decision making, right? So what evidence do we have? So again, just another resource for teams to look at. And then the next thing, as they talked about in the video, was asking those open-ended questions versus yes or no. So here are some guiding questions that we have for you. Again, you could bring back to your leadership team. I would ask you now to maybe drop in the chat as you read these 5 questions. What are 1 or 2 questions that maybe would be a priority for you to bring back to your team to start and build collaboration, or that would be an entry point for your learning in your district? So if you want to take a moment to read this slide over, which 2 are resonating with you today that might be an entry point or something you'd want to bring back to your team related to HLP1? I did open my chat and I happened to see 4 a couple times, which excites me. I mean, it doesn't excite me because not a lot of people love conflict. But it excites me from the point of that is the next little piece that we're going to give you a tool for. So from a coaching perspective, one thing that I often talk about is nobody likes conflict. But one piece of supporting a team through coaching is using coaching stems. And so when we talk about that, this link is really about the coaching profile, and there are some coaching stems by component. And so there's a lot of resources here. But one of the things that we can share is some coaching stems around healthy conflict. And so when they talked about listening and paraphrasing, some coaching stems that we can give teachers is, I hear what you're saying, but I disagree, right? Or I disagree with what you're saying, but could you hear my reasons why, right? And so how do we give those types of stems so that we can agree to disagree, but in a respectful manner? And so those are certainly resources that we can share. And Elena Aguilar is referenced here, but is certainly one of the people that I go to for coaching STEM. So I love that number 4 was dropped in because it is a place that we tend to shy away from. And sometimes our body language, as they talked about in the video, when we're nodding to show that we're paying attention, it sometimes also signals agreement and we may not agree. And so that is hard. But that's where I think those sentence stems do kind of come into acknowledge that we're listening, but also that we have something to say to respectfully disagree. Also, then we have some connections that we want to make to HLP 1. And so as we process through and think about HLPs, we can make connections to much of the valuable work that you are already supporting, building and implementing in your schools and districts. And so the next steps are, how do we infuse HLPs into those strong EE practices and systems within the mindsets of all educators, within continuous improvement cycles that impact outcomes for the students we serve, and all students, of course, with intentional and proactive planning, because this certainly can be done. And so you'll see here the educator effectiveness, plan, do, study, act, and some mindset cards. And then finally, being mindful of our time, the last slide that we have for you then is just some HLP tools and resources. Again, some Cedar Center tools, analyzing HLPs. And I saw along the way in the chat, my colleagues were dropping in those different surveys and rubrics and things. But I would just leave you with this quote that, of course, collaboration allows for varied expertise and perspectives about a student to be shared among those responsible for the student's learning and well-being.
Thank you, Rachel. As we dig into the HLPs with our inductees and just with some of our leaders in our schools, I think that it's the resources you shared can certainly be helpful. As we wrap up, I want to thank everybody for being here today on behalf of DPI, RSN, and WCAS. You got an email from Melissa McCorson about a survey, so I encourage each of you to take that survey. Our next time that we're together is January 7th, 2026. I had to double check that I get corrected the year to 2026 on the slide, from 9 to noon. Registration is in the agenda, and our tentative topics are maintenance of effort, Medicaid, FBA resources, and high leverage practices. We'll look at the next pillar. As always, if you have feedback for us, please give it. Otherwise, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and thank you again for joining us.